Full into Gunjan.
Hi everyone. Thanks for tuning into the Startup Operators Weekly Roundup. I'm your host Gunjan Saha, and along with Roshan, we'll be covering the biggest developments from the Indian startup community from the previous week. If you're someone who likes to start the week knowing what's happening in the world's second largest startup community, don't forget to subscribe to the Startup Operator podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast platform. Now, it has been a really interesting week with a lot of big check sizes being invested in startup communities. India is on a massive, road to digitizing its healthcare systems, and the electric vehicle revolution is in full swing. But Roshan, while we'll be discussing most of this news, how has the week been for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been a busy week, quarter ending, right? Some very good news on all quarters. No pun intended, but yeah, it's been a great week, right? And couple of things I want to call out, before we get on with all the fundraise and other activities and stuff, right? So I think RBI introduced this additional factor authentication. That is it's called as the AFA. Basically, all of people who had subscribed to products or services had to re-auth all of their commitments again, right? And going forward, I think anything over 5,000 rupees, the bank will have to send an OTP about 24 hours in advance and do this one-time additional to the one-time registration as well, right? So that has been causing a little bit of pain for SaaS businesses and content creators. I mean, I did see a lot of chatter out there. But yeah, customers can opt out of this as well. They can choose a term period up to which for certain specific products or services, they can say that, I don't want to do this. And they will be, they'll be exempt, right? And it doesn't apply to EMIs and SIPs and so on, but mostly, products and services. Now, if you look at how Indian regulators behave, right? I mean, if you consider consumer protection at one end and cost of or ease of doing business at the other, regulators overly index on the consumer protection front, and this is typical of an emerging economy like ours. Hopefully these kind of things will relax going forward. There was also some exciting news about India and Taiwan potentially a deal that would bring a semiconductor plant here worth about 7.5 billion, right? And we've seen all of the semiconductor shortages, how it's impacting automobiles, phones, and so on and so forth, right? And even last year, India approximately imported about 40% of the total electronics from China, right? And given everything that's happening, including the the troop buildup and everything, we really have to hedge against that. But yeah, I mean, even though it might take about 3 to 5 years, I think it's good. I mean, it's sort of a shifting of supply chains, and it's much needed for India. So yeah, I mean, these are two things that really stuck out for me from the week that was.
But anyway, we are like to a big bang start to this quarter, right? One of the most hotly talked about startups from the ecosystem, Oyo, they recently filed their papers for their IPO. And I think they're looking for to raise $1.2 billion from the public markets. Now, if you look at Ritesh, right, he started Oyo right after dropping out of college back in 2013. And even before he turns 30, he'll become a billionaire if Oyo gets successfully listed. And I think this listing will happen sometime in next year. Currently, Oyo is the third most valuable startup in India, being valued at $9 billion. And the mobile application has been downloaded over 10 million times. Now, this really puts them at par with the likes of, Airbnb and Booking.com, who are like global market leaders. And interestingly, not many people might know this, but Oyo is also the second largest hotel chain in the world. And markets like India, Malaysia, Indonesia, and European countries account for more than 90% of the hotels listed in the platform. But interesting, while these great developments are happening, there has been a lot of pushback from the hotel owners, saying that there have been a lot of complaints about the management and everything, and a lot of development approach has been made to SEBI to get some deeper insights into this. But it's a new quarter, another IPO, big company. What do you make of this?
Yeah, the market is hot, man. I mean, and obviously the investors would love to exit in this sort of a scenario, right? And Oyo has raised about 4.1 billion from a variety of investors, Sequoia, SoftBank, and so on. Interestingly, the founder will not be liquidating much of his shares in this IPO, right? In general, I mean, it's been a tough year for hospitality and travel, right? And it's reflected in Oyo's income as well, right? Their income is down. Their losses are also down because I don't think they've spent as much as well, right? So the income for the year that was around 4,157 crores, and the loss was at 3,928 crores, right? And I think it seems like, if all approvals go through and everything, the IPO might happen in December or Jan, right? And if you mentioned one of the largest hotel chains, right? And the whole premise of something like an Airbnb or an Oyo was to start with a very asset light model, right? And it's interesting to see how they've sort of backward integrated and how they're owning some of the supply as well. And it's only the natural course of things, right? And it will happen in multiple spheres, really. So Airbnb listed last year in the US in December, and it's been a crazy year, right? I remember listening to Brian Chesky on How I Built This, where he said that in March or April, 70% of their demand vanished overnight, right? And to come back from that to be capable enough to list again, I mean, it's been a phenomenal achievement. So yeah, I mean, Oyo, all the best to Oyo. I've had very mixed response, with Oyo, but I mean, that's always going to happen in something at that scale, right? Where controlling last mile quality and service and stuff like that is very, very difficult, right? But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this pans out.
Yep, right. Also closer to home, Starlink has been trying to make headways in India. Elon Musk most recently hired Sanjay Bhargava as India's country director for the internet service. I think Sanjay earlier worked with Elon as vice president in digital payments for the PayPal platform. And in his previous role, Bhargava had also co-founded an investment advisory firm called Bharosa Club and served as its chairman. Now, satellite broadband services have been really picking up in India, right? And by 2022, I think Starlink will be available for beta testing if the regulatory approvals are here. And even like if you look to talk about Elon Musk, right? Back in July, SpaceX had a meeting with the Department of Telecommunication and said that, and they mentioned that they plan to partner with Indian communities to locally manufacture satellite equipments. That includes your antenna systems, user terminal devices, and the rest. They also said that SpaceX will also, look for multiple opportunities to maximize the efficiency of its global supply chain, and India is a very strategic partner in that. But we have seen what Geo did for the whole Indian economy and the country, right? Now, once we have players like Starlink that offers highly low latency internet speeds, how do you think that will take India's growth mission forward?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, this is platform level innovation, right? Internet is magical. It can enable people to do amazing things, and it can literally pull people out of the lower strata of income and so on, right? And we've seen the whole geo revolution, how many things have really spawned from 2016 onwards, right? And I feel last mile internet will have to be covered through stuff like this, right? Even though the pace at which internet has grown in India, especially over the last 4 years, has been tremendous. So anything to add to that, anything to reduce the burden will definitely be a positive, right? So apparently pre-orders in India have crossed over 5,000, right? And the Starlink folks are, planning to work with rural constituencies and so on to start providing these broadband services, right? So, you mentioned an if there, right? Saying that, if the regulatory approvals go through, and that is a big, big if actually, because if you look at, the Department of Telecom and how, in general, I mean, how regulation has been, right? I mean, it's recently you saw that the government announced a 4-year moratorium for some of the telecom companies to settle their dues and so on, which was a very, very positive thing. I mean, it was seen in very good light. And then now last week you saw fines for Idea and Airtel about for about 3,000 crores, right? So it's always a 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of a situation. And regulatory approvals are not trivial also, right? Because stuff like this, for instance, I mean, we've been extremely skeptical of Huawei, for example, right? Because of all the security, potential security threats that could be involved and so on. So things like this always have to go through like proper regulatory approval, and it won't be easy. Uh, so hoping that all of that is managed, but the promise of Starlink is amazing, right? I mean, imagine if you could get 50 Mbps or 150 Mbps, somewhere sitting out of some remote corner of the North India, for example, right, Northeast or
Right.
somewhere. I mean, it's tremendous. It's an amazing leverage, and people have tried it before, right? Google had this. They had this moonshots program, and one of the moonshots was Google Loon, which was hot air balloons that could provide internet, right? And that, I think, since has been phased out, and they've recently partnered with SpaceX on that. Amazon has a project Cooper, apparently, right? So yeah, this is excellent stuff, and hopefully it goes through, and hopefully we can all benefit from it.
Right.
And I saw a very interesting thread by this guy Julian Shapiro on Twitter, right? And it was about moving out of the cities to some really, I won't say desolate place, but like a rural place, and working out of there, right? And you're going to see that happen with remote, with internet access and so on, right? And that, I think, is a very, very good thing, because it'll reduce the amount of stress on our cities, really. And it'll improve ecosystems outside of our main cities, right? Tier 2, tier 3 cities, towns, villages. I think we'll definitely see an influx of people who just want who want the peace and quiet, and can work out of there as well. So yeah, stuff like this really, really helps.
Right. So last week, Vedantu had also raised $100 million round as part of its Series E fundraise, and this was led by Temasek's ABC World Asia. And after with the Series E funding, Vedantu also became the fifth edtech unicorn in India. Other investors included Coatu, Tiger Global, GGV Capital, and Westbridge Capital. And Vedantu also is the largest K to 12 live online tutoring company in the country. I think they're catering to over 200,000 paying students last year, a 300% growth from the previous year that was. And the growth was also accompanied by a revenue increase of 4.5 times in 1 year on year. And all of these are signaling that Vedantu is one of the fastest growing online education company in the space, and is overall, I think, the second largest company in the K-12 space in terms of revenue and number. But another unicorn founder, Saurabh, we had interviewed in a podcast earlier, right? And the journey which Vedantu has had competing in this highly crowded space. I mean, it's a really commendable story, don't you think?
Yeah, and also Vedantu was one of the early ones, right? So we had Saurabh Saxena, who was one of the co-founders, who's gone on to start Uable right now, on the podcast sometime last year, talking about how he built an edtech. It's a fascinating episode. I think it's a primer for anyone looking at the space. Do check it out. But man, 28th unicorn for this year. Can you believe that? It's crazy, right? And so edtech, we've spoken about plenty on the podcast, right? Even I think a couple of weeks back we covered one of the Byju's acquisitions as well, and it's one of those things where the genie is out of the market, right? And even if people do go back to physical schools and colleges, I think we'll settle on some kind of a hybrid, and all of the institutions as such will have to play with these edtech providers. So yeah, Vedantu is doing pretty well. 65 million in revenue. They've grown 4 times, as you said. 35 million users, out of which around 200,000 are paying users, right? Which is an important number. And interestingly, I read that they're going to look at two things, right? One is international opportunities, which is something, again, we have been saying often enough, that if someone from Chennai can teach someone in Bangalore or Bombay, they can as well teach someone in the US as well, right? So international opportunities. And the other is they're also looking at a B2B play, right? Something to engage these schools, colleges, and so on, provide them some platform infrastructure, who knows, even like financing as well, right? And we've seen, how important software can be, especially, for these kind of physical institutions, right? So yeah, I mean, selling software to schools is not easy, but I think, who knows, Vedantu might pull it off, not just software. I mean, it could be content and enablement as well, right? Financing. So yeah, it's a very, very big market, right? A lot of headroom, huge margins. So yeah, I won't be surprised if you have sixth and a seventh edtech unicorn pretty soon.
Right. Might be you'll see that one of the companies that Baiju's acquired, that in itself could have become a unicorn. But yeah, some of the changes which 2020 brought in, right? I mean, for sure is the way the education system has changed. Things are more virtual now. Education is kind of democratized, as you had mentioned earlier in the podcast. But another trend that has been picking up is the number of the size of check sizes, right? Which investors have been going. Last week, CredAvenue raised a $90 million a Series A round. Tiger Global, their 207 million round for off business, right? Who has been like on fire in the past weeks. And even Meesho, the social commerce platform, has raised a $570 million Series F round. Now, see, we understand, right? Like, given the year that was, investors are coming back with that greater force into the market, but a lot of apprehensions also come in. But what are your thoughts in the some of the check sizes that you're seeing nowadays?
I'm just so happy that there is so much of growth stage capital available, man. Because I keep saying, right? I mean, 10 years back, any of these businesses would have probably exited at 100, 200 million, right? Either the Meeshos or the off business and so on. But look at how aspirations have risen, right? I mean, we're raising 400, 500 million dollars of growth stage capital, which is really phenomenal, because these companies can very well go on to become like multi, decacon type of businesses, right? We've spoken to Vasant Sridhar of Off Business. You should definitely check out that episode if you want to understand everything that's happening in B2B commerce. And Vasant is one of those rare few people who can articulate the macro very, very well and tie it to some of those executional nuances as well. Wonderful episode. Do check it out. And of course, we did interview Chetan Kalyan, who's the head of engineering at Meesho. And he spoke about what goes into setting up for something like this, right? Tremendous scale. So do check out that episode also. I think we should talk to someone on the business front at Meesho sometime. It'll be really interesting to understand this whole what is really happening in this alternate e-commerce sort of a sphere, right?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we haven't covered much of CredAvenue before. And I was checking it out. It seems like a super interesting sort of a business, right? And I think the previous largest Series A was around 50 million of Mensa, and FamPay had raised about 38 million, Credit 25 million, I think. But yeah, 90 million beats all of them convincingly, right? So it's pretty crazy. So CredAvenue, I thought it was an NBFC, a typical fintech sort of doing lending as such, which they may very well be at some point of time, right? I mean, they will, because it's profitable and because it's such a much required sort of a service, right? I mean, and as India grows, and it's only expected to grow, the demand for capital also will go up, which means that these folks will have greater bargaining power, right? I'm talking about the banks and financial institutions as such. So CredAvenue basically operates basically they're a platform that connects corporates seeking loans with financial institutions and other investors, right? So you can basically lend, invest, and trade on the platform, and they have a whole bunch of operating software, right, for this entire market and for all those entities involved, right? So which is pretty amazing actually. And we've spoken about how the account aggregator framework will make things competitive as well, right? And stuff like this as well will add to it. And I always would love to see more competition in debt capital for sure, right? Because that is so key to growing a business, right? You look at manufacturing, for example. We keep saying that manufacturing hasn't grown much and everything, but it's very difficult to scale without capital, right? And so with this availability of capital, I think you will see a lot more of these businesses really move to the next orbit, I feel. So yeah, pretty interesting business actually. I would love to understand more about CredAvenue.
Yeah, even the growth they've had, right? I think CredAvenue was just started last year, and till date, I think they've facilitated transactions over $9 billion, and they have around 1,500 institutional borrowers and over 750 lenders are using this platform on a regular basis, right? But see, the large checks are not just restricted to social commerce. Even the whole EV revolution in India, right, has been picking up steam. The government has already made plans to give away $8 billion to car makers who use petrol, so that they're able to focus more on producing EV vehicles. In the revised plan, the focus is only on automakers that build electric and hydrogen powered vehicles. But there's an additional $3.5 billion bonanza worth of incentives for manufacturers in the next 5 years. Even Tesla, as we mentioned, right, they have been gearing to enter the country, and I think they're lobbying with the government to lower the import duties, right, which has been the major pain point for them so far. And last week, Blue EV, which is an EV ride-hailing startup, they raised $25 million in the Series A round, and that was led by BP Ventures. Mayfield India Fund, Nine Unicorns, and Suvam Partners were other participating investors. Even Ola Electric, they raised $200 million in this latest round, and I think the valuation is up to $3 billion right now. And the Ola, of course, they won't be restricting the market just to India. They have eyeing expansion plans across Southeast Asian markets. And Falcon Edge led this $200 million round while SoftBank participated. But this is not the end. The round is still continuing. So maybe in the next round, we'll be covering Ola Electric a bit more in detail. But we have discussed quite a few times that this whole thing is not just about companies producing EV, but rather setting up the entire infrastructure to sustain this, right? And I think the plans government has already earmarked plans for 2030 to phase out some of the diesel and gasoline cars. So how do you see this going forward?
Look, I'm super bullish on EV, right? And it's one of those innovation comes we will just leapfrog. Like how we went from, how we skipped desktop and directly went to mobile, right? It's one of those innovations that we will directly leapfrog to, right? And you've seen in recent times the amount of stress on coal and oil and all the conventional energy sources as such. So this is a no-brainer, actually, if you ask me. And there have been a lot of regulatory tailwinds also on this front, right? I mean, we've spoken about the FAME subsidy for EVs, right? And I mean, Make in India and PLI and all of those things. So all of these things are, the government actually nudging innovation in the space. And not just nudging, I mean, we've also seen how the government will procure EVs for some of its own use as well, right? So yeah, and early stage innovation requires a lot of resources, capital, and supporting infrastructure, right? Because as we've spoken earlier, you don't just innovate at the application level. I mean, you have to be full stack at this point of time, right? You'll have to own plenty of things with the life cycle itself, right? Right from the, if you're an OEM, right from the batteries to the vehicles to charging stations to everything, right? And as the ecosystem grows, I think, more and more people will start coming into the market. In fact, I mean, I think the Maruti chairman itself had mentioned that, they will wait and watch and they will enter the market at the opportune time, right? And so, yeah, I mean, so right now, I think Tata, Mahindra, Ola are the key players, right? And it's going to be interesting to see.
We even have some like really strong players in the two-wheeler electric vehicle space as well. The likes of Ultraviolet, Ola Scooter, Ather, the likes.
Yeah. No, and the two-wheeler market, I mean, India is the biggest two-wheeler market in the world, right? So yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see Ola versus Ather versus TVS versus Bajaj. Of course, Ultraviolet is playing in the superbike category. Yeah, I mean, all of this capital is going to go into, buying up some of that innovation that's required, right? And let's see how this pans out. But super interesting stuff.
Yeah. So last week, I think it was on Monday when our Prime Minister announced the Ayushman Bharat Digital Health ID, right? This is a unique health ID that was be randomly generated, a 14-digit number, and people can register using their Aadhaar number or mobile number. And to quote our Prime Minister, this initiative has the potential of bringing a revolutionary change in India's healthcare facilities. And this has been in tune with the consolidation we're also seeing in this space. Loop Health, which is an insurance startup, they raised $12 million or about 90 crores in its Series A funding, and this was led by General Catalyst and Elevation Capital. Loop Health provides insurers group health plans to companies which range from like startups to big corporations, and they bundle it with a virtual primary care experience through an in-house medical team and a network of service providers. And taking that a one step forward, Mfine, they raised $48 million in Series C round, which was led by Move Strategic Ventures and BNext, with participation from existing investors. And Mfine wants to build one of the largest virtual hospitals in the world. and also make high quality healthcare more accessible and effective with the use of AI and mobile technologies. They're also enabling clinical decision support for doctors using AI and bringing vitals monitoring and health management to consumer smartphone. So there's a lot of this what was once considered, government-led initiatives. It's all becoming very personalized now. Even with this whole Ayushman Bharat digital health ID, all of these things will become more accessible to people, not only from the urban
Yeah.
spaces, but from rural India as well.
Yeah, for sure. So there's actually an artificial constraint on supply, right? I mean, I won't say artificial, but I mean, there are a limited number of doctors, in fact, right? According to, I think, WHO standards, we need to have one doctor per 1,000, but we have something like one doctor plus for 1,500 plus people in India, right? And uh, yeah, healthcare is, we've seen, I mean, what has happened over the last year and a half, for instance, right? There's an acute lack of infrastructure. There's a huge demand supply mismatch, right? And so it's ripe for innovation, for startups to come in and like really solve these problems, right? And if you look at the care itself, right, primary care would be something like visit to GPs. A secondary would be like maybe going to a specialist, and tertiary would be like a clinical procedure at the hospital itself. So I think if you look at all of these three things, I mean, we need to solve this very tactically at first, right? I think immediately, I think what we need is like some of these alternate healing practices also being encouraged, right? Things like Ayurveda, for instance. Of course, I mean, they should be scrutinized, and of course, we should put them through proper, rigorous testing and validation and all of that stuff. But here's the thing, right? I mean, I think 90% of the stuff that people see actually like a specialist or something can actually be reduced, right? You won't go and see you know like an endocrinologist or whatever immediately for a stomach pain, right? I mean, you could be solved, it could be solved at a very primary level itself through an intervention like something like what Mfine is pioneering, right? So where telehealth has actually become a reality post COVID. That's it, right? I myself have engaged doctors in this fashion, and it's super useful, right? But it's also a very difficult business to operate in. Primary care means, I mean, you're probably talking about 200 to 500 rupees, and this is a very low margin business. So you will probably be able to charge 20 or 50 bucks for a transaction. And, how many times will you really see a doctor in a year, right? Probably 3 times,
Right.
maybe less than that, right? So they're not too much repeats as well. So it becomes integral for something like an Mfine to add all of these value added services like diagnostics or referrals to surgery and so on and so forth. So Mfine competes with I think the likes of MediBuddy, right? MediBuddy, I think, is owned by MediAssist, which is an insurance TPA. So yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do in healthcare, but then I mean, of course, it's a highly regulated space, right? I personally am looking forward to a lot of preventive healthcare and wellness coming in, right? Things like ultrahuman, for example. I think these gadgets and stuff will get commoditized going further. I think it will be available. I can stick my neck out and say it will be available for as little as 500 or 1,000 bucks, maybe 3-4 years from now, right? And this whole consumerization of healthcare is the way to solve it, because you're not going to be able to build enough hospitals, have enough doctors, have enough services, facilities for 1.4 billion people. That's just a reality, right? So things like this will are definitely required. Yeah.
Right. Also, if you look at some of our advanced tech markets, right, such as Indonesia, Hong Kong, or US, many of these insurers are now working with tech companies who are producing like smart wearable devices to
Yeah.
actually underwrite some of the claims, right? And I think
That's a whole other category of innovation, right? I mean, because look, I mean, right now we pay a one size fits all basically. So when I for any insurance, basically when I'm buying car insurance, I'm also paying for that whoever who drives or rides really rashly, right? And similarly, when I'm paying for medical insurance, I'm also paying for the person who smokes and drinks like a chimney. So yeah, so that's actually going to be very, very interesting. I think that we should definitely talk to some people on that front.
yeah, it'll be interesting topic to explore. So in other news, Exotel, which is a cloud telephony platform, they raised $35 million as part of its Series C fundraise. And this fundraise was led by IIFL AMC, Systema, CX Partners, and Singularity Growth Opportunities Fund. In June, Exotel and call center software provider Amio announced their merger, and with the combined entity will be focusing on building a full stack customer engagement platform. Now, almost 35 to 40% of this current fundraise will be used to provide shareholders exits from the Ameo merger. But I think in the next few years, Exotel is looking to hit an annual recurring revenue of 200 million USD in the next 5 years. And they're also making major plans to increase the headcount by over 200 in the next 12 months. Now, we have seen Exotel, we've talked about Exotel in the past, and there's a lot of potential to actually achieve these targets. How do you see this happening?
Yeah, Exotel is a phoenix, man. I mean, it's one of those older SaaS companies founded in 2011, right? And Shivkumar Ganeshan is an excellent entrepreneur. We've seen over the past 3 or 4 years that cloud telephony has gotten extremely commoditized, right? I mean, it's a non-trivial thing engineering wise, right? So which is why a lot of people don't really build these things in house. They rather integrate with someone like Exotel. But yeah, I mean, companies like Nolarity, Ozontel, all of these guys are operating and they haven't done really well because, as I mentioned, the margins are really low, and the cost is like it's a speedy race to zero, right? I mean, that's how it is. So what becomes super important is the value added services on top of all of the cloud telephony, right? And I think that is why the Exotel and Ameo deal was so interesting. Ameo provides a contact center software, and so yeah, I mean, this is really amazing. I think Exotel is Bloom funded, if I'm not mistaken, right? And they've been invested in the company for a while now. So it's good. It's really good that some of these folks will get an exit, and looking forward to all of the next level of growth and innovation coming out of Exotel.
Great. So these were the major headlines that we had to share this week. And this tweet by Rajiv Mantri accurately summarizes the bullish excitement that we have, going forward in this quarter. The tweet reads that, even after preparing for UPSC, a person can easily move into a tech role such as data science, right? The sort of optimism we are there in the market just means that more youth should be taking a career path into the tech side of things. They're full of opportunities, and India is now for the millennial crowd, right? So to say. But what are some of your comments on that?
So more than a couple of things about this tweet, right? One is I think it's also about shifting aspirations, right? I mean, for a large section of India, the key aspirations for more than a few generations was to become IAS, IPS, right? And people would just study really hard for these UPSC exams and so on. But now, I mean, look at the level of opportunities that we have, right? And so, I mean, I think Rajiv was quoting a UPSC aspirant who moved to data science instead. And I think, the Prime Minister as well, probably a week back or something of that sort, had kind of subtly alluded to this as well, while congratulating all of the UPSC aspirants, saying that, there are a lot of opportunities. Don't get disheartened, and, look at other opportunities as well. I think it's very important. I think, we've said India has the youngest demographic in the world. And all of these people should definitely look at, employment opportunities beyond whether it's the PSU banks or the UPSC and stuff like that. So I think it signals a shifting India, really.
Great. Okay, so let's bring this roundup to a close. Roshan, I think, have you spoken with Robbie yet? Or is this
No,
a
I'm
conversation that will happen?
yet to talk to him. I'm going to talk to him next week. I think, we've spoken about Nazara, we've spoken about Dream 11 and bunch of these gaming companies, right? So I would really want to understand from Robbie, what's happening on the ground. So I'm really excited about this conversation, and should be a great episode.
All right. So yeah, I mean, folks, do keep an eye out on our social media channel for more updates regarding the episode. But yeah, another week, a great start to the quarter, a lot of large check sizes, a lot of optimism in the healthcare EV space. And I'm sure as we'll be, talking next week, we'll see more other domains getting impacted by tech. But folks, thanks for tuning into this week's roundup. A lot of optimism. Always keep sharing your thoughts and feedback on us on what we can do to improve our production. Also, in the description below, you'll find a WhatsApp link in which you have started a subscription. Please do subscribe for that for the latest updates delivered right into your WhatsApp inbox. And yeah, Roshan, I will see you again next week. Thanks,
See you
Roshan.
guys.